On August 19, 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev, then president of the Soviet Union, was at a summer resort in Foros on the Crimean Peninsula, overlooking the Black Sea. While relaxing, he was surprised by the sudden loss of communications and the absence of news from Moscow. At that time, hardline members of the Communist Party, including Vladimir Khrushchev, the head of the KGB, were mobilizing to announce a coup against President Gorbachev. Gorbachev had aimed to reduce the power of Soviet intelligence and impose strict oversight on the systems and activities of the KGB. When one first hears the name KGB, the immediate association is often with James Bond movies and the global spy wars between Russia and America, or even Egyptian intelligence and Mossad. However, no security intelligence agencies currently existing in the world compare to the vast scope of the KGB, which the head of the Soviet Union himself sought to rein in. If you believe that the KGB was the first implementation of an intelligence security apparatus in Russia, that is mistaken. The idea of political security and intelligence in Russia began centuries ago, specifically in 1825, when Nicholas I became the Tsar of Russia. Nicholas was so unpopular with the Russian people that they resented his ascension to power. A few days after his ascension, a major uprising and demonstrations, known as the Decembrist Revolt, took place, in which more than 3,000 officers from the Russian Imperial Army, in addition to many citizens, protested against Nicholas's assumption of power. Because of that uprising, Nicholas formed a vast network of spies and informers, establishing the third section of His Imperial Majesty's own chancellery, the first system of political internal security police in Russia and throughout Europe. Its mission was to collect information to protect the state and thwart uprisings, as happened in the Decembrist Revolution. This body evolved and changed over time, though it went through many stages until it eventually became the KGB. In 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution erupted in Russia under the leadership of Vladimir Lenin. The Soviet Union was officially established in 1922. Due to the large number of opponents to the revolution from various classes, Lenin established a political police force called the All-Russian Extraordinary Commission for Combating Counter-Revolution and Sabotage, commonly abbreviated as Cheka.
This agency was created to be the sword and shield of the revolution. It was initially a small, exceptional agency whose goal was to investigate and deal with any threat to Lenin's new regime. Lenin did not supervise the group himself, but chose Felix Dzerzhinsky to lead it. In the beginning, Cheka was a small organization with very limited operations, having only 120 agents in early 1918. However, with the growth of opposition during that same year, the increase in anti-Bolshevik activities, and the onset of the Civil War, which included an attempted assassination of Lenin, everything changed. Dzerzhinsky began recruiting thousands of new agents. The organization's scope and rhetoric expanded, operating without legal constraints, conducting investigations, arrests, executions, and spontaneous campaigns. In 1922, Cheka was replaced by another institution, the State Political Directorate, GPU. It should be noted that the change was largely a change in name intended to improve its harsh image that had spread in previous years. Dzerzhinsky remained the head of the GPU. Nevertheless, its number of agents was enormous, spread throughout the state in factories, administrative offices, streets, and even outside the Soviet Union. GPU agents operated in foreign countries to track and abduct opponents of the Soviet Union. In 1934, the GPU was merged into another institution called the NKVD, which stands for the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs. This became the weapon used by Stalin in the Great Purge, a series of repression and political persecution campaigns that lasted from 1936 until March 1938. In 1938, after many opponents of the regime, both in Russia and abroad, had been eliminated, Stalin declared that internal enemies had been eradicated. Later, he even criticized the NKVD for carrying out mass executions, ordering the execution of the heads of the apparatus during the Purge campaign, namely Genrikh Yagoda and Nikolai Yazhov. In 1938, Stalin summoned Lavrentiy Beria to become the head of the NKVD. Beria, who had been the head of the GPU in Georgia and was responsible for the Great Purge in Georgia, was one of the powerful and influential figures in the Soviet Union, to the extent that he took over the apparatus even after Stalin's death. In 1941, the NKVD was briefly split into two bodies, the NKVD and the NKGB, People's Commissariat for State Security, then merged and split again in 1943, with the NKGB being formed to separate state security functions from internal affairs. Later, in 1946, the NKVD became the Ministry of Internal Affairs, MVD, and the NKGB became the Ministry of State Security, MGB. Both ministries were under the supervision of Lavrentiy Beria. Beria was not only responsible for state security, but was also the Minister of Internal Affairs and in charge of managing the nuclear bomb dossier for the Soviet Union. Beria and the intelligence apparatus played a very significant role beyond repression and persecution, imprisoning a large number of opponents and sending them to gulag camps. In addition, during the war with Germany, Soviet intelligence achieved significant successes, including the penetration of British intelligence services like MI6 and the anti-espionage service MI5 through agents such as the Cambridge Five, though the claim of transferring more than 200,000 secret files from Britain to the Soviet Union is an exaggeration. Russian intelligence was also able to foil some assassination attempts against Stalin and conduct intelligence operations within Germany during World War II, notably through networks like the Red Orchestra. There were Russian spies from the intelligence apparatus who reached important positions in Germany itself, whether in the Ministry of Armaments, the German government, or the German Foreign Ministry. Even after the end of World War II, Russian intelligence managed to bring many German scientists to the Soviet Union to utilize them in its nuclear program. Moreover, Beria sent a team to America to spy on its nuclear program. This occurred during the Cold War between Russia and America, which immediately followed World War II. Russian intelligence succeeded in obtaining complete plans for implementing the nuclear bomb and stole many of its secrets. In 1953, after Stalin's death, Beria attempted to seize power. It has been rumored that Beria was actually responsible for Stalin's death because after Stalin's last dinner at Beria's house, a severe stroke struck him and he died 4 days later. However, Beria's plan did not succeed due to the new Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, who, along with other high-ranking officials, conspired against him. Khrushchev then had Beria arrested and executed after a secret trial, and after assuming power, he launched a series of major trials against the chief of staff and officials in the Russian intelligence apparatus, MGB, executing many of them. After that, the release of millions of political prisoners and opponents of Stalin from the Gulag detention camps began. Following Beria's execution in 1953, the police and political security sectors were reorganized. In 1954, the MGB was replaced by the Committee for State Security, KGB, while the Ministry of Internal Affairs, MVD, remained. Then, under the shield and scepter of communism, the Russian intelligence apparatus, the KGB, emerged under the leadership of Ivan Serov. Their first task was to track down and eliminate all of Beria's followers. The roles of the KGB continued just like those of all previous intelligence agencies, pursuing and arresting opponents. During its heyday, the KGB reached the zenith of Russian intelligence, exerting enormous control both inside the country and abroad. It became one of the largest intelligence systems in the entire world. Its mission was not limited only to pursuing domestic opponents, but it was also a massive organization with spies stationed outside the country in every nation. Moreover, while KGB spies were present throughout the world, few spies from global intelligence agencies were found inside the Soviet Union because the KGB was highly effective at exposing and arresting them. During the Cold War, on more than one occasion, the KGB outmaneuvered the American intelligence agency, the CIA. Since KGB agents were selected very precisely to be the best, most patriotic, and smartest, they infiltrated countries and their political systems with ease. They were professionally planted in America as businessmen and politicians. All this was in addition to their successes in stealing scientific research and military secrets. Russian intelligence successfully obtained the method of constructing the hydrogen bomb from America and even the production of satellites and space rockets,
transferring manufacturing methods without always needing to conduct their own extensive research.
The KGB was composed of a very large number of departments and directorates, with each individual having a specific task performed to perfection. Departments for foreign espionage, departments for internal surveillance, a directorate of operations and technology, and many laboratories specializing in toxins, narcotics, and scientific research. All this, along with the KGB's constant main approach of protecting the Communist Party, spreading communist principles, and defending them, continued until 1985. After Mikhail Gorbachev became the head of the Soviet Union, he decided to implement reforms related to foreign policies. He wanted to achieve peace between Russia and Western countries and establish a new system based on trust. So, he began to ease international tensions and the conflicts of the Cold War. Not only that, Gorbachev started to reduce the powers of the KGB within Russia, limiting its role. At the same time, the KGB was eventually transformed and dissolved into multiple successor agencies, though Vladimir Putin, the current president of Russia, became head of the Federal Security Service, FSB, much later in 1999, not during the initial reforms of the KGB. Due to the vast powers that the Soviet Union's leadership had granted to the president and the parliament, a reaction from conservative elements, including within the KGB, was inevitable. This brings us back to our story in 1991, specifically on August 19th, when Gorbachev was surprised by events unfolding in Moscow while spending his summer vacation on the Crimean Peninsula. At that time, there were coup attempts led by the head of the KGB, Vladimir Khrushchev. Boris Yeltsin, then president of the Russian Federation, declared a general strike and civil disobedience, considering the military's actions illegal. He headed toward the parliament building, where thousands of people stood by him, and declared civil disobedience in Moscow and other Russian cities. This prompted the largest force of the KGB to withdraw its forces on August 21, 1991. Subsequently, the coup leaders were arrested: Khrushchev, the head of the KGB, Dmitry Yazov, the Minister of Defense, Valentin Pavlov, the Prime Minister, and Gennady Yanev, the Vice President and Gorbachev's deputy. After Gorbachev returned on the following day, he announced his resignation as head of the Communist Party.